What's up, guys? It is February 20th, 2017, time for Q&A response, and I have a ton of questions. Well, quite a few. There are actually some really good questions. You guys are making me use my brain here, which is good. A lot of these questions are kind of outside the box of the normal scope, which is really cool to see. So let's dig in. First one from my man Joe Jeffrey. Have you noticed in your experience that for the most part you have to employ a different approach psychologically to men when compared to women, or do you feel it's more based on the individual? Yeah, there's some tendencies between men and women that seem to be common across the board. You know, one being women might have a little harder time with weight gain and off-season situations, and could be the opposite for men, where they are more comfortable in that situation, a little less comfortable in the contest prep situation. They're going to lose all their muscle, right? So that's not across the board. It's just commonalities, I think, just stuff that I see pretty regularly. I think a big thing here too, and obviously with that you have to approach them psychologically a little bit different. And with that, I think a big thing is the background, you know, where they came from. People that come from a weight loss background, had lost a bunch of weight and going into competitive physique arena, they have a really hard time with that transition after their first contest prep, going into actually gaining weight, and, you know, or just increasing calories. All those things that are necessary to regain normal metabolic function, hormones, all that stuff. They have a really hard time with that. Or someone in the opposite scenario has had a really hard time gaining weight and is now going to prep for a contest. Biggest thing is assuming they have good guidance, you know, and they are ready to do those things like a prep. Then you need to explain to them beforehand, hey, look, this is going to be a hard transition. This prep might feel very comfortable to you psychologically. It might get rough physically at some point, but psychologically you're going to feel comfortable because, you know, it's weight loss, losing fat, and so on and so forth. But there's going to be a really hard transition period where your body might fight us a little bit, and you know, it's going to be tough. So I think it's just important to kind of foresee those things ahead of time, the things that might trouble them, and just let them know, hey, this is going to be, you know, might be a hard period for you. And that's not the only things that people struggle with. I mean, in general, you might have people that are, let's see, for example, I found some guys don't provide enough information, or maybe ask enough questions, whereas women might ask too many. Not too many as a bad thing, just questioning versus asking questions. And so neither of which are good. It's just something that I've noticed, but it's definitely going to be an individual thing. So next question, what to run alongside IGF LR3 to help effectiveness? In the sense, if you run MK677, it's good to run EGCG and melatonin to help its effectiveness. Also, in your opinion on whether companies are dealing with real IGF, as the old debate goes with Mr. Piana, who believes it can't be bought from a peptide company and it costs thousands of dollars for the real stuff. Well, the reason you're using EGCG and melatonin with a secretagogue is to help somatostatin inhibition. It's not necessarily, you don't have to do it. Peptides will still work without it. It's just that is an inhibitory thing that your body's going to basically produce to limit the amount of pulse that you're getting. So you want to block that and let the pulse be bigger. So that's the reason for that. And it's not really quite like that with IGF. I mean, anything that's producing more growth hormone will help IGF levels, hence why you test IGF levels on a blood test to see the effectiveness of growth hormone or its purity or whatnot. But as using IGF LR3, it's not, you don't necessarily need to use those things. You can use it on its own. It works a little bit differently. And as far as it being real, well, it's not it's not like acrylics, like the actual pharmaceutical grade IGF. No, it's not. I don't, as far as I'm aware, I don't think companies really claim it to be that. I think that they're talking about specific peptide strands. It's a substrate of IGF, just like, let's see a good example. Just like a peptide is certain amino acids, or HGH frags is certain amino acids. It's not necessarily, I don't really think the companies are claiming that it's the same thing. So I think that's important to understand. It's not going to be the same. Nope. Main thing I see with those peptides, whether it be LR3 or DES, is nutrient partitioning and better pumps. So it's definitely doing something. It's it's working. Its partitioning is good. So it's doing something, whether or not, or it might, affect blood sugar, lower blood sugar a little bit. So it's not the same thing as what you're referring to. So no. Doubt this is video worthy, but let's see. I tried the John Meadows concoction bowl. I have had bad experiences with core in the past. Cream of rice. It was thicker and I felt like it sat in my stomach. If you add more water, it's soup-like. Does that make it any easier to digest? If you have the slightest idea of this, but anyone else, please feel free to chip in. By the way, it was a 1/4 cup of uncooked core and 8 ounces of water microwaved, like the instructions in the box say, thinking doing a 1/3 cup as I am smaller. I mean, you can get any consistency out of it that you want. Usually more water is going to slow digestion more, but if you have no water at all, then you're going to have a hard time transporting the nutrients. So maybe that's it. I would just try it with a little bit more water and get a creamy consistency. That's what it's supposed to end up like. I think a lot of that too is just the power of the microwave. Also, I could cook it for the same amount of time in one microwave versus another, and it's going to be completely different consistency, even though the water content and the actual core content's the same. So that could be just a microwave, difference in wattage. But I would say just mess around with it. If it still bugs you, then it's not for you. You're going to need to try a different carb source. When dieting, when a plateau is hit, how do you typically decide to increase cardio training intensity versus increasing caloric deficit? Ideally, it's nice to have just kind of even keel between the two, just because it's you're creating a caloric deficit from different pathways. You say increasing caloric deficit, but meaning pulling calories, but you're also increasing caloric deficit by adding training or increasing training volume or increasing cardio. It's still creating more deficit. So ideally a little bit of both at once, unless I know for sure that someone responds better to one or the other, or one's really, really high. It's like off-season situation, and cardio is not there, but calories are really, really high. I would probably just go ahead and pull from the calories right off the bat, just because I noticed that the body tends to adapt to that a little bit easier, and you got to get a good swift pull in there. If not, you might just adapt pretty quickly. I think it sounds like you're asking more so if you hit a plateau later in the prep situation. So in that case, like I said, from both, unless one or the other is really high or really low, then you might try to even it out a little bit. I'm not really one to have someone eat a ton of food and do a ton of cardio just to offset it. I think I would lean towards a little more activity just to be able to eat a little bit more, but I'm not going to go crazy with it. I don't think someone should be doing 2.5, 3 hours of cardio so they can eat, more carbs or whatever. I think that's ridiculous, just because you're tapping into, nervous system recovery and just recovery in general and overworking your body. So that's kind of my take on that. No, it's not really a set in stone answer, but try to keep it even. Top 2 favorite tasty high fat, high protein meal options. Oh man, my fats get pretty high. I think my favorite thing are fatty meats. I really like grass-fed beef. I'll do an 85 or 90% lean grass-fed beef, depending on how high my fat is. And if my fat's high enough too, I'll add some grass-fed cheese to it. Kerrygold has a brand that's at most grocery stores, or I'll get a different brand if I'm going to like an actual health food store. They have some pretty cool stuff. But man, that's delicious. You get a fatty grass-fed beef with a grass-fed cheese on it. It's absolutely delicious. Put your vegetables with it, you know, and you're set. I would say second is, man, it's probably my favorite. I eat a lot of that actually. I really like eggs, whole eggs. I get pastured eggs usually, so that's just kind of my preference for the fatty acid profile. So pastured eggs with, you can again add some veggies with it, and just a little bit of oil to top off the fats if you need to. Coconut oil is really good in that instance. I would say that's it. I don't do a ton of nut butters and stuff like that, really. So I'm not someone that just sits there and eats like jars of peanut butter just because my fats are high. It's not really my thing. Plus I tend to have a sensitive stomach when I overeat nut butters. So can TRT and thyroid be used together without causing any issues? Yes, should be able to be. I mean, they're synthetic both. You can control the levels, assuming you get blood work done and you're checking, you know, see where each is at. Now, if you use one without the other, there can be a negative feedback loop, and you might notice that one's lowering the other. For example, sometimes I see people with, I guess this isn't a direct example, but sometimes I see people with low testosterone that also have low thyroid. And people that actually get too high of testosterone and it negatively impacts their thyroid. These mechanisms are pretty complex. I'm not going to sit here and go into every single little bit of the mechanisms on that, but that's definitely possible. I'm gonna grab my phone charger. It's dying. Don't want to lose you guys. So together, yeah, that's fine. No issues there. Just obviously get your blood work done, check your levels, make sure everything's in line. Next one, what's your take on fasted lifting in the mornings, and is protein intake needed immediately after lifts? I don't have any problem with fasted lifting. I think that going into the lifts fast is okay. I'm not a big fan of going through the whole lift without at least some, like an EAA product or something. Not really a fan of that, but people do it, and I realize. I think that it's okay if you have, you have something like essential amino acid. That's not fasted completely, but you can have nothing in the morning, water, whatever, go to the gym and sip on the EAAs while you train. I think that that's okay. And if you're asking about protein after fasted lifts, definitely. I mean, you want to get muscle protein synthesis stimulated. Training is going to help with that some, but you need the amino acids there to do that. Yeah, there's still amino acids circulating in your blood. There's still some fatty acids circulating in your blood, a little bit of glucose, all that stuff from the night before. Your body regulates that stuff. It's not like it goes to zero just because you haven't eaten. So yeah, you could probably lift fasted and not have tons of issues, but I just prefer to have at least some EAAs in there. Thoughts on, make sure I say this right, nicotinamide riboside. And this is basically a form of, it's not directly niacin, it's a type of niacin supplementation, is more or less what it is. And this is to increase NAD plus levels for improving metabolism, blood glucose, insulin sensitivity, etc. Hype or legit? Okay, this is a complex question. This is probably one of the more complex ones I've had on the Q&As, but yes, the mechanisms to me make sense as far as what I've read on it, and I haven't read a ton, but I honestly have no experience with it. I haven't had anyone try it, and my main deterrent there is just the amount of niacin that you need to take. And we're not talking the no flush niacin. You need the specific form, the flushing niacin, and you can use an extended release. That'll help some, but I don't have a study in front of me, but I do remember the amount being pretty hefty, and to me, I probably couldn't handle it. I take 500 milligrams, look like I'm about to stroke out because I'm just like bright red and crawling out of my skin. So I personally probably couldn't do it. Maybe I could, but really wouldn't want to. And the main reason that, even though, like I said, it does make sense on paper, and there are some studies in human cells and in mice, I believe, but I know that there's other things that work to improve insulin sensitivity, more or less, and glucose metabolism. So I've just never really messed with it. And that's just me being honest. So I wish I could give you more info on that, but I'm sure there's people that have tried it. I decrease training volume leading up to a show as I reduce calories. Last 4 to 6 weeks, primarily compound movements. Last 3 weeks, cardio is removed and leg workouts is 5x5 squat with medium heavy weights, nothing else. Your comments. If you're asking me if that's right or wrong, yeah, I mean, if you can get away with removing cardio 3 weeks out from the show, good for you, and reducing training volume. Most people just can't do that and be peeled. It's just not going to happen. Unless they're ready way ahead of time and they're eating into the show. I would probably I would be fine with removing cardio, slowly doing that. Maybe even completely gone for some people, not in few cases, but it can happen. I probably wouldn't be messing with training a whole lot. I mean, I know you're saying primarily compound movements, and I think that's good. I probably wouldn't mess with it a ton though, honestly. I might the last week, obviously back it off, let the inflammation clear and so on and so forth. Unless someone's really, really beat up, I wouldn't mess with it a ton, especially as I'm increasing calories. I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't mess with it a ton. And cardio being removed also. So, in my eyes, I think you're okay to keep going as long as you're being intelligent with it and trying to maintain your tissue. This scenario sounds nice. I just don't think it's realistic for most people unless you're ready way ahead of time. If you can get peeled and you're doing that and you can reduce basically overall caloric expenditure that much before a show, good for you. That's awesome. How much will my gains increase if I become a cat owner? Well, mine haven't increased much, to be completely honest. They are motivating, really. I mean, as you can see, I think you could probably see them. Very motivating. Pretty much my purpose in life at this point, other than answering Q&As and harassing my wife. So I wouldn't expect much in the way of gains. They might make you lazier if you take after them too much, though. But I do love my cats. In recent episode, and there's only a couple more here. Recent episode, you guys discussed health advantages of taking GH in one dose rather than multiple doses. Could you elaborate on that? I think what we were referring to is from an insulin resistance standpoint, just taking it repetitively through the day in smaller doses, constantly elevating growth hormone, going to cause some insulin resistance, at least quicker than it would if you took it less often. So that's probably what we were referring to. I don't necessarily think it's, from a health standpoint outside of that, I don't think it's really going to be a disadvantage. Just because if you really think about what GH does, it does pulse itself. So if you were pulsing it basically with exogenous GH on your own, then you're basically simulating what the body's going to do anyhow, just in larger amounts. It's just like how peptides work. That's why they can be used multiple times a day, because there is pulsing. So the main thing is insulin resistance. If you're just hitting GH all the time, then the amount of time that you can use it without becoming insulin resistant is probably going to be shortened a lot. So pros and cons. Let's see. Are there any helpful supplements and or tips in regards to getting your metabolism back on track after straying from your diet? And I elaborate on this question asking if they were actually asking about getting unwanted pounds off after straying from your diet, and I think that's what she meant. So yes, supplement wise, not really. You figure if you stray from your diet and it's not you're not under eating, metabolically, you should probably be in a pretty decent place. I mean, if you're eating more calories, you should probably not have any issues metabolically. You should just be able to jump back on whatever you're doing, maybe go lower, go into like a brief mini cut type scenario. Your body should be pretty primed if you were eating more calories to drop some fat. That would be my first go at it before, and you can add normal fat loss supplements in, depending on what your preferences are and if you have any kind of rules and regulations and competitively. So I would say that in that situation, you're probably not as bad off as you think. I mean, it's just going to take a little bit of time in a caloric deficit, but your metabolism is probably in a better spot than what you realize just because you were eating more calories. So you just got to kind of look at that the right way. A couple more. Have you checked out the latest Hour of Penance album? No, I haven't. Looks good though. I'm gonna check it out. Thank you, Connor, my fellow death metal connoisseur. Although he seems to be a little more relevant and newer stuff than me. I'm all old school, I guess. So he keeps me up to date. Any rough guidelines at all that you have in a prep, like 12 to 8 weeks out? I like to see all abs, 10 to 6 weeks out, glutes coming in, etc. Not really, just because everyone leans out at such a different rate. I think the biggest thing here is that if you want a certain look and you want a certain muscle to show, say you want your goals to have visible glutes on stage. If you don't have visible glutes a couple weeks out, you're probably not going to have them unless you were just an absolute water buffalo and you just dropped a shitload of water, in the last week or few days or whatever. So my rule of thumb there would be if there's a look that you want in the muscles, certain things that you want to show, like you want your triceps to be striated, whatever it is. If they're not pretty close to show, they probably won't be, unless, like I said, you're just holding a lot of water. So that is a kind of a good rule to go by. Last question was private message. Let me grab it. This is a good one. All right. So preface this with, I was anorexic for 15 years, or I was anorexic 15 years ago. Sorry, probably not for 15 years. And my period never returned. I'm at a healthy weight, but I do train a lot. I have no medical problems. Otherwise, do you know anything diet and fitness related to correct hormones, help restore a period? I do have low estrogen levels according to my last blood test. Chances are, and this is not what you want to hear, but a couple things. You might be able to do a course of hormones to jumpstart it. I've had clients in this situation. I think other coaches probably had too. It's just because the female body is only willing to go so low in body fat and calories and training so hard. Every girl's a little bit different, but for the most part, there is a limit. You might be able to do a jumpstart course of hormones, depending on the doctor. That could be progesterone, that could be Clomid, could be both. It might even be a situation where they do like a hormone replacement that's a little bit longer, something that's a combination supplement that might have estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, whatever it is. Depending on what's low, you would need to talk to a doctor about that and have some blood work done to see what all needs fixed. But on your own, the unfortunate part of this is that in reality, in order to fix this on your own, you would have to probably severely back off the amount of training and get fatter, eating plenty. And it's not even so much eating. I mean, couple girls I've had get their calories way up, but they're still leaner than their body wants to be. The period won't come back. So at least not on its own. So I know that's not what what people want to hear, but that unfortunately sometimes is the only way to get it back. And then you might be sensitive to losing it again when you get into those kind of deprived situations. So I would ask about a jumpstart course of hormones and getting hormones fixed. It's not necessarily that you have to be on a permanent hormone from your doctor. And if the jumpstart works, then you're okay without it. So I would kind of look into that first. Some things dietary-wise, making sure you're getting plenty of fats in your diet and cholesterol. A lot of hormones are going to be fat soluble, made of cholesterol molecules, things like that. So you need to have plenty of that in your diet, lots and lots and lots. So that is important. Just calorically, making sure your calories are up in a good spot, but most essentially those nutrients. There's not a ton else that you can do. I mean, there's a couple over-the-counter supplements that might be useful, but I think they're going to be mediocre at best, and you probably need to look into, assuming you're doing the things I just talked about, maybe even backing off training slightly for a little bit. You could even look better. You'd be surprised if you train a little more than you should, but let's assume you do all those things, then I'd probably look into some type of hormone jump start, whether it'd probably be progesterone or Clomid, most likely. So I wish I could give you a better way that you could avoid all that stuff and avoid having to gain weight and all those things, but unfortunately, sometimes that is the only way, unless you just don't care if you have a cycle, which it's your choice too. I mean, some people don't. They don't, really care about fertility or anything like that, so it's not super unhealthy. It's not the healthiest thing ever. As long as you're not having, menopause type symptoms all the time. People just live with it because they just don't want to gain a bunch of fat back. So personal preference. That's it for today. This was a really long ass video. So if you're still listening, thanks for sticking with me. And these were awesome questions, and I will talk to you guys next time.